Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Thip Khao Talk, an original series by Legacies of War. My name is Oratai. I am a Legacies of War board member, and today we have an interesting discussion called Trailblazer. Legacies of War was founded in 2004 after the recovery of original drawings by bombing survivors in Laos from the 1960s and 1970s. The drawings and the history behind these drawings inspired the formation of the only US-based international organization dedicated to the awareness about the bombings in Laos during the Vietnam War and addressing the vast amounts of unexploded ordnance that remain in Laos 45 years after the bombing campaign ended. So every month we host a Thip Khao Talk to open the dialogue about topics and discussions related to the aftermath of the secret war in Laos and the ongoing unexploded ordnance issue in Laos, also known as UXO. So Thip Khao Talk was named after this Thip Khao over here. It's a container for sticky rice. And as some of you may know, that sticky rice is a staple in most Lao meals. And often you'll find a variety of Thip Khao at large family gatherings, community gatherings. And it's common to bring the Thip Khao and to share. So the gathering like we're having right now, it's the same thing. So today we have two extraordinary individuals, the executive director of Legacies of War, Sarah Kulabdara, and the co-founder of Article 22, Elizabeth Suda. Today we're going to learn about their very different approach in addressing the remnants of the secret war in Laos and introduce an exciting new initiative. For our audience, please feel free to comment, or if you have questions at any time, please put them in the chat box. We have a Q&A later in the program, and so we'll revisit these questions. All right, let's get started with our team today. Sarah, you started your new role as Executive Director of Legacies of War just last October. But you've known about the UXO issue your entire life. Can you let us know, how you learned about it and what led you to Legacies of War?
Gosh, thank you so much, Oratai, for that question. And thank you for moderating today's talk. My first talk, so I feel very much that this is extremely special. And Elizabeth for joining us today, and all of you tuning in, out of all the places that you could be, you're joining us here live today. So, to start, I really want to take you down memory lanes with me. I have so much memories of Laos. Oftentimes I feel like, if I look out my window here, I can see 6-year-old me in Laos so vividly, But before we talk about me growing up in Laos, being 6 years old, I want to take you back even further to 1950, when my parents were both born. I want to talk about this because it's really, really the beginning of it all, right? Like without my parents, I wouldn't be here. And both were born and raised in Champasak, Baksay, Laos. My father, being the eldest son, had this extraordinary responsibility and honor, and a privilege to be that person that my grandmother designated as, hey, you're the eldest son. You get to carry on the family name and you get to go and build something for yourself. And to really leave a legacy for our family name. So as a 12-year-old boy, my dad embarked on this incredible journey to the capital city of Laos, in Vientiane. He stayed in the outskirts of Laos with monks. Back in those days, this was very common practice. We weren't extraordinarily rich family. There was 9 siblings, with my dad. So he went to, stayed with the monks at the temple in order to get his education. And in recompense, he would do just, errands for the monks, sweep the grounds of the temples, and just earn his keep, right? But, to get an education was a big deal. Not everyone got a chance to do this. So having lived through this, in 1964, my dad was only 14 years old. And this, as I think many of our viewers who follow Legacy's work know, that this was during the bombing era, 1964 to 1973. This span of 9 years really impacted my father's life. And this actually led him to the work that he became later on in life, which was a doctor. Through that span of 9 years, when the first bomb was dropped, my dad was only 3 blocks away. And hearing this noise, you really have to put yourself in the shoes of someone in a third world country. 1964, hearing this loud noise and seeing the damages that was caused by these weapons of mass destruction, it probably would have moved you in the same way that it did for him. So he became a doctor. And, I'm very, very proud to share that my dad was only second to his mentor. So being ranked number 2 in the country, he could have worked anywhere in Laos, especially in the hospital that he did spend a little bit of time in, but he chose to move around. He traveled with my fearless mother all over Laos in the most remote parts. He even went to Vietnam. And when I was born, my parents actually left me in the care of my grandparents, and they went to Cambodia, where, when they returned, I had a little brother. But, I share all this because this is really something that was told to me years later when my father said, why we moved around so much was because these different areas of Laos where there's no access to a hospital, no access to any doctors, and by doctors, in Laos term is really someone who has apprenticed. We don't have big medical schools that people can go to, but they really learn as they go. So a lot of the doctors in some of these villages didn't have medical training that my father did. So he decided to do that. So my memory, like my childhood memory is colorful. I would say that we lived in some of the most remote places in Laos. We experienced so many incredible things. I could tell you endless stories, but I won't. But I will share, one of the things that I remember the most is hearing my father recount his day to my mom, treating someone who was just trying to plant a crop in their field, but then they struck a bomb. And luckily, my father was there to really help heal some of the wounds, even though the impact of it is life-changing. They're losing limbs. But I write a lot about this in my blog, and life wasn't easy, for us to be living in remote parts of Laos. Oftentimes we didn't have electricity. We stayed in a small hut, like in the middle of nowhere. But despite all of that, my parents gave my siblings and I a wonderful, wonderful childhood. I have so many fond memories of chasing my little brother Mickey around, climbing the jumpa tree in the front of our house, my favorite house in the outskirts of Vientiane. Just remembering that it was there at that house that my parents shared that I was allowed to go to school that year. I finally was able to reach one arm to the other ear, and you get to go to school back in those days. It was that easy. And I remember how excited I was waking up that morning, checking my bags like 10 times, and my mom pending a jumpa flower in my hair. And I waited by the door for my dad to finally walk me to school. And of course, my little brother, being so attached to me, wanted to come along, even though he wasn't ready for school yet. But my dad, being that just amazing, kind person, he allowed Mickey to walk with us. And walking, when we got to a certain path that was leading to the school, I remember my dad just playing with Mickey and I, saying, as he was running, chasing us, just saying, don't ever veer off this path because the nagas and the ghosts and the tigers will come on and get you. And he would just pretend to be a tiger chasing us. Of course, at that time, being a child, I literally thought that tigers were going to come and eat me. But years later, I realized that that was the only path that we knew was safe. We knew was clear for children to walk to school in. But it was during that same week, of moments where I was so happy getting to go to school, that my parents also announced to us that they made the decision to bring us to the US. As a child, I thought everything was exciting. It was a whole new world. And the way my parents painted it for us was that, look, you get to meet your cousins. You get to go to a whole new school. Everything is bigger. Everything's better in the US. It was exciting. But I knew it was a tough decision, because I knew how much my parents both love Laos. But when we finally got to the US, Laos faded in and out of our lives. We went on with our lives. We got an education. My siblings and I rarely spoke to one another in Basa Lao. We rarely talked about anything, that had to do with Laos or our culture. We sort of wanted to assimilate and blend in and just try to be American, because we're straddling both worlds, being the 1.5 generation. But as we got older, it wasn't really until my brother, Bay, who was living in DC at the time, started volunteering for Legacies of War. And he sent me a link, and after that, after you meet Janapa, your life changed and you're with Legacies for the rest of your life, right? And I eventually started volunteering, hosting events in, my home state, Ohio, until I was recruited to be on the board. I thought like, wow, you could have picked anyone, but it was such a huge honor. And I felt so moved by it that I became vice chair. And then later, trying to fill the size shoes of Janapa today, being the new executive director. And I guess the rest is history in the making as we speak today.
Yeah. Wow, it's their incredible story. I mean, we are so very lucky to have you as executive director. I mean, you're continuing the much needed work for, a safer Laos. Okay, up next, we have Elizabeth Suda, the co-founder of Article 22. Liz, you established Article 22 nearly a decade ago. And it wasn't, making jewelry from bombs that initially drew you to Laos. Can you tell us about your story and how you established Article 22?
Yes, well, thank you so much for making this happen. You guys have a tiny but incredibly robust team, as we do too. So I really appreciate it. And clearly, we've gotten to this issue of UXO and the secret war from completely different angles, but yet we have been joined together for the past 10 years in different ways through different types of partnerships. And kind of in a nutshell, my story started at Coach, where I worked in the merchandising department, and I started to really think about how fashion could be more sustainable. And so little by little, I would just, research online, and I got really interested in organic cotton and handloom weaving. And I actually first applied for a Fulbright to India. And I always like to share that point because I didn't get the Fulbright, and it was the best failure ever because it brought me to Laos, to the complete unknown. I'm ashamed to say I hardly knew where Laos was on a map, let alone nothing about the secret war history. And what really drew me to the country in my research was, a few different organizations there, including women-run businesses, one called Nikon Handicrafts. In the 1990s, she opened this women's weaving studio and started exporting out to Europe. And I was captivated by what local traditional knowledge could teach us back in New York about what sustainability meant in fashion. And So I ended up packing my bags, going to Laos for 6 months, and working with this particular woman by chance who welcomed me into her family. And one thing led to the next. I had no idea what to expect out of Vientiane. I was used to cities like New York, which are pretty intense. But Vientiane was kind of like a warm hug, honestly. It was a place where you'd see people on the street and you'd see them again the next day, and the community was pretty tight knit, and I started meeting people, and that led to a consulting opportunity for Swiss NGO Helvetas, which took me to the north of Laos for the very first time, to a village called Ban Napia. At the time, interestingly, like you, Sarah, you grew up living in some of these villages with no electricity. The first time I went to these, 4 villages, I was there to understand what they could be doing for textiles and, adapting them for a local tourist market. These 4 villages had just gotten hydropower. The idea of electricity at night that could possibly give these talented women weavers an extra hour after their day farming to relax and weave, believe it or not, it is somewhat cathartic, was kind of revolutionary for them. And so I was there to look at what textiles could mean for their local economy. Could we match them with the local tourist industry? Long story short, in each of the 4 villages, I said, well, what else do you make here? Just to have a big picture. And in one of these villages, they led me to a shed with all different scrap metal inside of it. And the woman picked up a piece which she recognized was in English, and on it said rocket mortar. And then she led me to an earthen kiln where an artisan was pouring these scraps of metal that had become molten into wood and ash molds, and opening the mold, you would find a luminous spoon. And I recognized this spoon. It was a soup spoon that I had eaten my soup for breakfast from. It was the same exact spoon. And I thought, these were bombs dropped by my country. And I had no idea that this war had happened. There were 80 million unexploded bombs in the land. And I studied history and didn't realize that Laos was part of the Vietnam War. And suddenly things clicked. The little bits that I had read all became reality in front of me. History hadn't ended. The people in this village had found a way to take something so negative and make it into something positive, a soup spoon, to feed their local community and to rebuild their lives. But they were still dealing with the aftermath of a contaminated village, of land that they had to farm, knowing that it could be dangerous for them to do. But they're subsistence farmers, and the only other income they had was from these soup spoons. And so I thought, maybe they can make bracelets. If they can make spoons, we have to try to get a bracelet out to the wider market, perhaps use fashion as a vehicle to do good, to raise awareness about the secret war, but then also funds to clear some of the 80 million unexploded bombs from the land in Laos.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just wanted to add on, Liz, we have to create greater awareness about really this multi-generational issue for the Lao people. And what we've learned from you and Sarah today is that, there are different ways to addressing the UXO issue in Laos. And now together with Legacies of War and Article 22, we're launching a new initiative. It's called Trailblazer. And I'm gonna leave it to Sarah to tell the story behind that.
Thank you, Oratai. And Liz, you're so right. Like, I never get tired of hearing you tell your story, because I think it's so important to share how we all, for whatever reason, we could have been anywhere in the world, but we end up in Laos, and we end up talking about the history of the country as well as what we can do today. So, I want to pose this question to you all. Have you ever gazed up, at the sky and see the billions of stars? Or have you ever looked at images or seen real live meteor showers? for me, that's what it was like going to Laos for the very first time after leaving in nearly 30 years. I felt like the world was colliding for me, like not just my own personal world, but the world of legacies, right? It just felt so surreal. Being there, it's this big, like, you know how sometimes you can't remember things, but then when you're there, something triggers and you remember literally everything. All the stories I ever heard my parents tell, usually during moments when, you know, I did something that displeased them, and they would say, you know, you wouldn't be here today if we didn't go through all these things. Or I complain about something very futile, like, you know, I can't even think of it right now. Like, why do I have to do homework or something? But they would say, your aunt had to cross the Mekong River at night while bombs was raining down. You know, don't you dare say complain ever again, Sarah. But all that came like flooding in to me. And then just seeing everything, you know, being in Sian Kwang, I think that's was the moment where I felt like we have to make sure that we keep telling this story. We have to make sure that we don't forget, that people don't forget. It stays relevant and it does not get erased from history, even though there isn't really a lot of books that our children are looking at today, similar to what Liz said earlier. But you know, the moment that I would never forget is being in Sian Kwang. It's, you know, if you ever been to Sian Kwang, the mountains there will take your breath away. The air there just smells different. The landscape is so picturesque. You know, our team was walking there, and we were walking the fields with the UXO Lao team, the national demining team. And I got to meet Mr. Ging Pet, who leads that region's operation. And at the end of our tour, at the end of our conversations together, Mr. Ging Pet asked if I would like to detonate some bombs that were found during the time span that we were there, as we were watching the women and the men do the demining work. And I was speechless, you know. I just felt like I don't know if I could do it, because I was feeling so much emotion already. And then I knew that once I pressed that button, I would never forget the noise that it made. And after I did that, that's when the concept of Trailblazer really captured my thoughts. But really, it's, you know, I felt it here. And it took me back to the first time that I was shown the original drawings that is the reason why Legacy was founded today. Seeing those drawings that were gifted to our founder, Janapa, was what really gave her the strength to bring Legacies of War to life, to really open our door, to have the strength and the bravery to say that this history happened. It happened, but we can't forget about it, and we have to do something about it, because we can. Like, we know how to get rid of these bombs. We just have to do it. And, you know, at that moment, I really felt like not only are we telling the story of legacies, not only are we honoring the men and women who had to flee Laos, not only are we honoring the pain and the trauma that, you know, my generation and future generations are feeling, but this is now literally etched in our Trailblazer bracelet, right? With that one word. And you know, this trip on so many levels is so special and life-changing. But you know, one of the things that I felt during the month that I spent there, and the weeks that I got a chance to walk side by side with our founder, Janapa, you know, a woman who I hold to such a high esteem. You know, she's one of my heroes. She's one of the people who inspire me to continue on in the nonprofit sector. You know, in every single meeting that we had, speaking with the countless survivors, the villagers, the men and women who demine every day, and the people who give service to the survivors, And the caretakers of these survivors, which usually are their family members, every single moment, every single meal that we had, I couldn't think of a better word to honor not only Legacy's history, but Janapa's leadership outside of Trailblazer. So, that is exactly how Trailblazer was born. And then the fun part was really, right when we got back to the States, I called Alex Heiniger, our board chair, our first chairwoman of our board, and said, hey, we have to fly to New York and we have to meet Liz and her incredible team. So on that fateful January morning, it was so cold, so different from Laos. Walking up the steps and finding Article 22's office by sheer accident. I, of course, being the clueless GPS type of person, went through the back door, but Faith had it, and Liz was right there, and she let me in. And our conversation that day, really, really warmed, I think, my soul, and I think Liz and team felt it too. All these years of our partnership, it's come to this, Janapa's original vision of doing something greater, of going beyond and creating this beautiful piece together that tells so many multifaceted story. It's really, I felt like this extra fuel in me after walking out of Liz's office that day. And then here we are, finally launching it on such a special day, not only for Legacies, because it's World Humanitarian Day, but for all of the humanitarians out there in the world. So happy Humanitarian Day.
Happy Humanitarian Day. Yeah, I mean, Liz, you've been partnering with Legacies of War for nearly 10 years. So why is this partnership, and why did you decide to strengthen this partnership through Trailblazer?
Yeah, so I mean, our jewelry has always been intended to be a conversation piece. It's meant to be that thing you're wearing and a friend asks you what it is, you're at a dinner party, and you suddenly launch into a very unexpected story about what it's made of and where it comes from and why, and what positive impact it has for artisans and for the funds we raise for Mines Advisory Group to clear unexploded bombs from the land. The reality is this story, this history is so multifaceted and layered. And without Legacies of War as part of it, as part of the story we tell, it's an incomplete story. So, I met Chanapa and Alex and Titus, board members of Legacies, back in 2010 at the International Convention on Cluster Munitions. And I was so incredibly impressed by what they had all achieved there, with Alex leading the Convention on Cluster Munitions, essentially making this, Laos's first international convention. And Chanapa and Titus telling their personal stories with regard to the war and the founding of Legacies of War. And I learned how incredibly instrumental Legacies had been in actually securing much of the US government's funding for clearing unexploded ordnance, money that would be allocated to various technical partners that would do the clearance do the clearance in Laos, or support survivors and victims' families, support mine risk education. This little but fierce organization, Legacies of War, was this unsung hero. And over the years, I've just been in complete awe of all that Chanapa has been able to accomplish as a leader, as a trailblazer, and incredibly importantly, building this community and network around her. it really struck me when she said, I think it was a New York Times article where she was quoted, and I'm going to read the quote: "There are many, many problems in this world that might not be able to be solved in a lifetime, but this is one that can be fixed." And that always sticks with me because it's a matter of getting consistent and increasing funding to clear the unexploded ordnance. And there is something terrifying and humbling about realizing just how attainable it actually is. It motivates me to do more. And so Trailblazer, this bangle is going to support the work that Legacies does. You know, it will continue to support our work at Article 22, MAG's work to clear unexploded bombs from the land, and then, you know, Legacies. We're gonna be able to tell your story, consistently share about the work and the progress that you make, and getting the U.S. government to increase funding every year to get that work done. And the idea is that because the proceeds from this will go to Legacies, you will be able to have some more flexibility. And on our side, we want to sing your praises. We want everyone to know about the work you do, because in a nutshell, our audience has been different. Using art and design to tell the story has been a completely different angle to communicate this history. And we hope that completely new audiences will learn about the shared work that we all have before us.
Great. Agree. I mean, our work are so interlaced and interconnected, and, you know, often Legacies is known to do the work behind the scenes, you know. So Sarah, do you want to share, you know, some of our partners that we work with, and, you know, the funding and where that all goes?
Sure. You know, so this question always comes up. You know, the big announcement. I think what Legacy is really, really known for is having President Obama actually go to Laos and announcing a multi-year commitment of $90 million a year for the next 3 years to go towards surveying the land as well as clearance work and survivor assistance. Not 1 cent of that money comes to Legacies of War. We're privately funded by partners like Liz, you know, by this bangle that we're launching today. That's how we keep our lights on in our 2-woman office, right? So the money that the US government commits to Laos goes directly to operators that are working on the ground, such as MAG, like Liz mentioned, Halo Trust, you know, World Education, who helps with survivor assistance. It goes straight into the country, and that decision is made by the State Department. Legacies can help advise and can help encourage. You know, we can share what we learn from our annual trip, but we don't make that decision. And we don't take any of the fun that comes out of it. And we do that purposefully. You know, we know where the money is needed. And in order to clear Laos within our lifetime, we have to get as much as possible going into that.
Agreed. Now, you know, we're launching this beautiful bangle, and we're hearing 40 million, you know, increase. And you guys both make it look so easy, but let's talk about some of the challenges. And I know there's a lot of challenges. Sarah, let's talk about, because you started your new role last October, let's talk about some of your challenge and, you know, how you address some of those.
How much time do you have? You know, Liz and I have offline conversation, like we're like each other's sounding board, like, oh, you deal with that too? Yeah, me too. It's endless, right? Like the list can go on and on and on. But you know, the only 2 things that I had to deal with this year so far is the 2 pandemics, right? But in jokes aside, I would say funding is our biggest challenge for our own operational work. You know, to keep a building in Washington, D.C., rent is not cheap, right? In order to fund things like the Thip Khao talk, right? You know, the work that goes behind this, it looks easy because we put in the work, right? Like we do our research, we come up with the questions together, you know, the three of us, plus the team that we have working behind the scenes that you don't get to see. You know, it takes a lot of work in order to make sure that our organization thrive. The second thing that I'll mention is visibility. Despite Legacy's turning Sweet 16 this year, we still face that challenge of people asking, oh, I didn't know you guys exist. You know, what do you do? Or, you know, what, that happened? Laos was bombed. Laos is the most heavily bombed country in the world. There's still questions around this, but if I wake up every day and, you know, open up my email, look at my phone and just think of all the things that we can't do and all the things that we don't have, we're never going to move our mission forward. We have to think, how can we collaborate? What can we do in order to make sure that we solve this problem and we get the job done? So we find strategic partners, we find people who are passionate, who want to do this with us, right? You know, you being one of them, or Thai, like, you know, being on our board, as you know, and you can tell everybody else that it's a working board, right? You're constantly in the grind together with myself, with our chief of staff, Alina, you know, with and all our other incredible board members and key volunteers and people that we meet along the way. You know, I honestly don't know when Janapa slept, because, you know, when I look at the Rolodex and the list that she handed over to me and said, make sure you know all these people, like call them your first 90 days. It's incredible because she was able to do so much. And for me, that's where I get my inspiration. And then, you know, meeting partners like Liz, knowing that she cares as much as we do and that she's willing to, you know, push the button a little bit and do more creative things. Like, you should be part of some of our ideation talks, because I'm like, can we make this move? Can we draw this? And who's going to do it? Right. It's so much fun. And it's, I get this whole fresh energy when we have partners that are willing to go the extra mile with us.
Mm-hmm. Totally agree. Liz, you have a whole set of challenges and issues, you know, tell us about, you know, some of those challenges and, you know, how did you succeed in that?
Well, I kind of will enter into the question through the word network. You know, I kind of grew up thinking, oh, it's such a dirty word, you know, like it's opportunistic. But actually what I've come to realize, and this is part of how I am overcoming my challenges, is to realize the value in community and knowing your circle of competency and knowing where you need to be honest with yourself and everyone around you and ask for help from someone with more expertise. Because when you are working on a project, where you have shared goals, the best result for everybody ends up being when you collaborate. I really believe that. I think that, you know, Legacies probably is challenged by, you know, visibility, as Article 22 is. You know, the fashion market is a really competitive, busy, loud place. There's a lot of terrible things that are there, that are polluting our environment, that are not made according to proper human rights standards. But there are also wonderful things emerging. And so, you know, visibility is definitely a overarching challenge. You know, we did choose to structure ourselves as a social enterprise and not as a nonprofit, with the goal of really resting on the product and being product led and making sure that people wanted to buy what we produce with our artisan partners in Laos, because it is a piece of history. It stands out because of its quality, its design integrity, its beauty, its storytelling, and its impact. And so, you know, at the time we started, another challenge was that sustainability and fashion were like oil and water. It was a confusing thing to explain to consumers to start, and then potential investors who we reached out to looking for just, you know, some additional funds to kind of kickstart our growth. In the end, we've mostly grown organically, and that's a real point of pride for us. And part of the way we've done it is through partnerships, as with Legacies of War, Minds Advisory Group, and a very close relationship with our community partners in Laos, from the artisans in the village where we work to Minds Advisory Group that's clearing the land. And through those partnerships, we're able to leverage each other's networks. And again, network isn't a dirty word. And that took me until 35 plus to realize. So I think what this bracelet symbolizes is an opportunity to, you know, really live up to the standards of what Article 22 is. I mean, I don't think I mentioned it, but Article 22 is named after the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And to paraphrase, this is through national effort and international cooperation, the right of everyone in the world to social security, economic stability, and the free development of personality. And ultimately, I think you are able to come up with more sustainable solutions when you have cross-sector partnerships, when, as with Article 22 and Legacies of War, we're a public-private partnership. You liaise with the government all the time. That links the government in. You know, your pillars are history, healing, and hope. You're linking civil society in, as we are linking civil society in as agents of change in Laos, with the artisan partners we have that are actually doing the work to transform the jewelry that is raising money for Minds Advisory Group to clear the bombs from the land. So our goal is to create a virtuous circle, and together we're stronger. Legacies of War and Article 22 are stronger because it's going to take a lot of attention and money to clear those 80 million bombs.
I totally agree, especially during this challenging time. Visibility is a huge challenge right now. And, you know, with this Trailblazer partnership, it essentially represents the shared goal of making Laos safe from the threat of UXO. And you know what? We're going to skip a section because we only have about 15 minutes here. You know, what I wanted to get back to is with the Trailblazer partnership. Sarah, what impact does this partnership have to the organization of Legacies of War? What does the potential funding of this bracelet, what would that in dollars mean for Legacies?
Yeah, really, really great question. You know, and I do also want to add in a quick blurb about Trailblazer itself. This truly did take a village in order to bring to life today, right? Like Trailblazer, from the writing of Trailblazer on the bracelet to the translation of it, right? I remember sitting with my mother and asking her to translate Trailblazer because, you know, as perfect as my Lao is, I didn't know what that word is. So my mom really broke it down for me. Puti sang sentang sawang, right? Like, so we just use the word sentang sawang, which means trail or path, and it's emblaze or lighten, right? And puti sang sentang sawang literally means the one who helped creates this path, this clear path. So, you know, this multifaceted word and this beautiful word mean so much. And that's kind of how I look at organizations like us, Legacies of War, companies like Article 22, folks like MAG, Halo, Norwegian People's Aid, and others who are clearing Laos, and others who are working with survivors like Quality of Life, World Education. You're literally being that person or that organization to create a better path or to clear path for survivors, for the future generations of Laotians living in Laos, for future diaspora community that go back to the country that is their birth country, or their parents or their grandparents' birth country. So, I think what this partnership really, really means for Legacy is that it's allowing us to really focus on what we do best. And that is roaming the halls of Congress, advocating for Laos, making sure that Laos does get justice by having all these bombs cleared, cleared to the point where it doesn't hinder progress for this beautiful country, that it doesn't make parents fear sending their child to school, fearing that their child's not going to be able to come back in one piece. That's what it means for us. I mentioned funding earlier, and it's always going to be a challenge, especially during this time. There's a lot of incredible causes out there, but this partnership really allows us to know that we have funds that we can depend on in order to, an example is hiring new young advocates that we can help inspire and teach and mold. One of my interns could very well be my replacement, when I retire with Liz and we're, having a beautiful brunch in France, or something, right? This can really help us create more contents like our Thip talk. I had a really great conversation with my friend Steve the other day. And he said, hey, Sarah, maybe you guys should create this podcast. And I said, all right, help me find the money and we can create it. Because these things all take resources, right? And by resource, I can mean staff time. I can mean getting someone to help, make the cover of a book, making the table of contents. All this take work and it takes resources that, I'm very happy that we have this coming from our partner at Article 22, and it's unrestricted, meaning Liz is not saying you can only use this to paint the wall, Sarah. She's saying use it where it's needed the most.
All right. Speaking of resources, Liz, what would this mean for Article 22 and the folks at Laos?
I think I touched on earlier the point that it's really completing the virtuous circle in this story. There are so many layers to history, and you realize when you get older that what you read isn't always what you can entirely trust. And what is omitted is significant. There are multiple narratives at play, and I think that you guys are the voice. You're the voice in this sector, from personal experiences and from an incredible track record that Chanapa and your entire community of board members and volunteers and interns have quite literally trailblazed. So for us, we have the ability to partner with experts, partner with people who are on the forefront of change. We're partners. We're humbled by every bracelet that we can sell that makes a difference, but those bracelets are just one part of a much, much, much larger story that you guys are on the forefront of writing. You're literally writing the future. And so I'm just so thrilled to be able to show the world that it's a complex place. And this one particular story of the Vietnam War has so many different threads. And I hope that we can start to return to a world where we accept complexity and, whatever that means, we see more gray. We can hold two opposing ideas in our head at the same time and not feel like we have to choose one or the other. So I hope that, you know, the stories that we'll be able to tell through your work will help people see that gray as well.
Thank you. Thank you both. So we just have a few more minutes. We're going to open up for some questions from our audience. Looks like we have a question from our fellow board member, Dave. He says, can you please expand on the Trailblazer program? Is Chunnapah the first Trailblazer? Will there be additional Trailblazers? Sarah?
Yes, thank you, Dave. Hi, Dave. Yes, as I shared in the very, very beginning, the concept of Trailblazer really came during the transition, right? Like when Chunnapah passed the torch over to me to fill her size 6 shoes, I really wanted to do something to really honor her leadership and make sure that it's symbolic for me to always be reminded of this incredible organization that she's was part of building, right? Like, and along with all of the other men and women that helped push her forward, that was her sounding board, that was her circle of trust. So yes, it is in honor of her being the original trailblazer for legacies, but I also think that this has so many multifaceted meaning. When you break it down into its Lao counterpart, Sentang Sawang, Trailblazer can really mean anyone who is lending a hand in helping us pave the way forward as it relates to legacies work, right? But I think of everyday men and women that I know within my life that's also trailblazing on their own in other important missions, right? So it's really symbolic. It can mean someone who, like my friend Whitney, for example, she's pushing the needle forward in making sure that women's rights is protected through her own nonprofit. It can really mean like our partners in Laos, Quality of Life, World Education, who's helping survivors. They're trailblazing in a different way. In the next couple of weeks and in the next month or two, Article 22 and Legacies will also be sharing a little bit more information to some of the few people. We chose 27 individuals to really highlight as this first cohort of trailblazers. And more information to come. You have to follow Legacies in order to learn more, but it's super, super exciting, and it'll all come together in full circle, I promise.
All right, it sounds really exciting, and I'm looking forward to it. As we're closing up, we have just a few more minutes. I wanted to ask Liz, since we're ending it with, anyone could be a trailblazer, Liz, can you provide some words of wisdom of, someone who hasn't yet seen themselves as a trailblazer, but, want direction in that path?
Yes, so I can provide words of wisdom, but they're not mine. They're not my words. They come from an activist and a North Korean defector named Yeonmi Park. And I had the occasion to see her speak twice in 2 different places, one in Oslo, Norway, and the other in New York City. And, she refers to herself as an accidental activist. And what that ultimately means is that she didn't choose this path. She had an incredible struggle to get out of North Korea. I highly recommend people watch YouTube videos, read her book. But the point is, when she got to New York, she said, I don't understand why everyone's so depressed here, because life is good. And I think that what that means is that we have to remain open. We have to have gratitude for what we have, challenges included. And I think that accidental activism can happen to anyone in any context, in any profession. It really hits on the points you both have made, Sarah and Oratai, about the strength of Legacy's community. People come to Legacies and contribute from all different sectors, and that is what makes the organization stronger. So as an individual, for women forging or trailblazing their own paths, who might not necessarily see themselves as trailblazers, I think it's really important to realize that there's a misconception that, you know, doing good is a matter of certain professions, you know, a doctor, a lawyer, a teacher, a politician. Actually, you can trailblaze in any profession by just being unafraid to take some risks and build that community, that network around you, because you never know where things will lead, where a volunteer opportunity will end up as, you know, your next job, to Sarah's point, you know, the next executive director, who will she be? So yeah, I think it really comes down to feeling not so scared, but feeling excited by what version of accidental you'll become.
Great words, Liz. Thank you. Sarah, to close it off, what would you recommend for people who want to support trailblazers working on this issue?
Yeah, so I'm gonna follow Liz's lead and also not use my own words, but in the words of Steve Jobs, the people who are crazy enough